Hello everyone and welcome to Code HQ. This is Facebook Clone Series Part 5, and in this video we will learn how to add a story feature to our app. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is to create a story feature. So I'm going to go inside the features and create a new one. This is going to be called story. Inside that I'm going to create a bunch of folders, but for now the only thing we need to do is to create our models. Inside the models, I'm going to create a model for a story. So let's create our model, and this is going to be immutable. So inside this class, we're going to have 5 properties. Let's write them one by one. The first thing we're going to have is an image URL. Then we need a date time. We also need a story ID, an author ID, that is the ID of the person who created the story, and lastly we need a list of views, and this is of course going to be a list of strings, and we're going to take care of how many people have actually viewed this story. So let's create a constructor, and I'm going to use generate constructor, and let's also make it constant. We also need the toMap and fromMap methods, and I'm going to just copy and paste because it's going to take some time. Let's do the import, and now you can write from it, or you can go to GitHub repository and just copy paste everything. So this was all about creating our story model. Let's also learn how to create our repository. So this time we go inside our story feature, and I'm gonna collapse all the other parts just to make sure we have put it in the right place. Inside our story feature, and I'm gonna create a folder called repository, and inside that I'm gonna create another file that's called story repository dot. I'm gonna again define it as immutable. First of all, let's define 3 final variables. So after that, we're going to define our method, and this is the only method that we are going to have inside this repository, and that is going to be post story. So let's define it. This method is going to take a parameter, and that's equal to our image, because all our stories are going to be of type image, but this is going to be of type file. And make sure to import it from dar.io. That is correct. Let's put an async, and again use try and catch like we always do, and in case we have an error, I'm gonna just return it. So the first thing I'm gonna do here is to define my story ID. Let's generate it through using UID package. I'm gonna use a v1. You also need to preserve datetime.now. It's gonna be cleaner. At this stage, I want to post my image to Firebase storage and get the download URL. So let's do that. We're going to be using our storage reference, and then go to ref. This ref is going to be the folder name, so I'm going to use storage folder names.stories, and what it actually is just this constant. So we're going to create a folder called stories, and then inside that we're going to create a child, and that's going to be called story ID. So this story ID is actually the name of that story. Then we need to get our snapshot, and I'm going to use ref.putFile method because we're going to put an image, and this is the most suitable one. And lastly, I'm going to get my download URL. That is actually very easy. You just need to await snapshot, go to reference, and then get download URL. So now that we have got our download URL, let's create our story. So inside here we have a couple of properties that we have to fill. The image URL is going to be the download URL because we have saved our image inside Firebase storage. You can save your image to any storage and then get the download URL. The created that is going to be now because every time we post a story, that is going to be the exact time. The offer ID, we should have it here. I'm going to be using my UID, and for the number of views, I'm going to pass an empty list indicating that this is empty and no one has actually viewed this. So that's for this. And for the last step, I'm going to post my story. So let's say, and this is actually so easy. Let's just say, await. We're going to go inside our Firestore instance, and I'm going to my story collection, and then I'm going to go and create a document. The name of the document is going to be again the story ID, and then I'm going to set or put my story there, and my story is here, but this is an object, so I'm going to turn it into a map, story.toMap. So this is almost everything about this story repository. Let's also make sure to return null in case we don't have any error. So we are actually done with the story repository. Next, we need to create our story providers. So now that we are done with our repository, let's also create our providers. And per usual, let's go first of all create a provider folder. And inside that, we're going to define our providers. And as usual, the first provider that we are going to define is going to be story provider. And as you might already know, this is going to be a very simple provider. So let's create it. So this is it. This is just a provider to provide our story repository object. Now we need to create a provider for getting all our stories. So let's get into it. I am sure you are quite familiar with the template. This is going to be an stream provider to get all the info in real time, but this time this is going to be a little bit more complex. But don't worry, this is not that difficult. And if you want to define it yourself, you can just go ahead and pause the video and start implementing it by yourself. So if you did not implement it yourself, I'm going to do it for you now. So first of all, I'm going to define the provider. And as you might guess, it is going to be an stream provider. And like always, we're going to have a reference. And let's import provider. And per usual, I'm going to make it an auto-dispose provider. And also, I'm going to specify the type of data that we are going to have inside this provider. And that's going to be an iterable of type story. So let's first of all define our controller. And that's going to be string controller. Again, this is going to be of type iterable story. And when the provider is done, we are going to return controller.string. So what this provider does is to go to our story collection, but do not get all the stories, but the stories that are posted within 24 hours limit, and also are posted by the person who is inside our friend list. So this is a complex part of this one. So the first thing I'm going to need here is to have my user data, because I'm going to access my list of friends. So let's define user data, and for that we are going to watch another provider that we defined earlier, and that's going to be get user info provider. And yes, this is not going to be streamed by the future, and I'm going to use that provider to say user data dot when data. So when we actually get our data, I need to extract my list of friends out of it. I'm going to call this one user, and inside it let's say I have a list of friends, and they're going to be equal to a list. And inside this list, I'm going to first of all put my own user ID, because I want to see my own stories too. And then I'm going to put the list of my friends. And to be able to put the list inside the list, we're going to use these 3 dots, and that's going to be the list of my friends. So that is it. And let's go defining other parts. So almost all of our codes are going to be written inside this bin data, because the only time we can get our story is when we actually have list of my friends. So we need to define all the codes here. And as always, I'm going to create a subscription. So let's go to Firebase Firestore, instance, collection of stories. And I'm going to order them by date created. And let's just go inside our story model and make sure we have used created that. And the order is going to be descending. It means to start from the latest story to the oldest. And then we're going to set a condition here. And that's going to be the date that the story is created at should be greater than yesterday. And then we need to get our yesterday. So let's go above and say first of all, I'm going to create a duration of 1 day, and then I'm going to subtract it from datetime.now. So every time you subtract 1 day from now on, it's going to be yesterday. And all the stories that I'm going to receive should be after this date. So all of them should be greater than yesterday's dot milliseconds since epoch. And then I'm going to put my second where clause, and that where clause says so this one is a bit confusing, but all I'm saying here is that my UID, and all I'm going to be saying here is that the author of the story should be inside this list. So the author of this story should be one of my friends, and I have included myself there. So either me or one of my friends has created this story. Otherwise, I should not see it. So let's get our snapshots, and then I'm going to listen to them. Let's name this event as a snapshot. And here we want to get our stories. And I'm going to map. And each of them is going to be story data. So all I need to say is to return story dot from map, and inside that map I'm going to put story data dot data. Beautiful. So I'm going to explain it again. All that I'm going to do here is to say I have my list of stories, and for that I'm going to go inside my snapshot. We actually have one snapshot. I'm going to go inside the document, and I'm going to map each item. Each item is going to be a story map, and I'm going to turn each of them to an actual story and store it inside here. So here we have an iterable of type story, not map. And lastly, we need to add them to our controller. So let's say controller sync.add stories. You could actually just say controllers.add. It doesn't have any problem, but I'm okay with saying controller.sync.add. And lastly, let's not forget to dispose our controller and also subscription. So when our provider is disposed, I'm going to also get rid of the controller and also my subscription. So why is this not working? Maybe we are in the wrong place. Let's go here and say yes, it works now. So this was all about getting our stories, and by this we conclude the topic of providers and also repository. So in the next stage we are going to start defining our UI. So now that our providers are in place, let's start building our UI. And for that I'm going to create my presentation folder. So let's go inside the story and build a new folder. Inside this we would have two other folders, one for screens and one for widgets. So I'm going to start building the UI from add story tile. So for that I'm going to bring on my emulator, and if you open up my emulator and open up the complete app, you see this widget. This is the widget that helps us to add a story, and this is the first widget that we are going to build. So let's start building it. Inside the widget, I'm going to create a file. It's called add story tile.dart. So this is a stateless widget. We are going to start by returning a padding, because if you look at the picture, we have some padding from top, and we have also some padding from the two sides. You're not going to be able to see it unless we see our actual stories. So let's build some padding, and it's going to be symmetric. And inside the child, we're going to have clip or rect to be able to give a border radius to our container, and the border radius is going to be 10. Then we have our child that is a container. We give it a color of dark white. We give it a height of 180 and a weight of 100. And inside the child, we're going to have a stack. And every time in Flutter, you see that two widgets are placed on top of each other, like this text and also this button on top of this card. You know that you have to use a stack. So let's build our stack. As the first children, we have a size box, which have a height and width of 120. And as this child, we have an image.network. And inside the image, I'm going to be using an image that is inside my constant, and that's profile pic blank. And inside the fit property, I'm going to be using boxFit.fit height. Yes, that is it. Then we're going to have another widget, and because we're placing it on top of another widget, it is going to be a position. Top is going to be 100, and we're going to give a left and right of 10. Inside the child, I'm going to give it a circle avatar. The radius is going to be 16. And as the child, I'm going to have an icon, and that's going to be icons.add. So this is exactly what we are building here. I also copy and paste this one to create my second position, but this time, instead of having this button inside the child, I'm going to put a column. And inside the column, I'm going to put two texts on top of each other. So let's first of all say text, create, and then you can say text, story. Although we could use our good old \n to create a new line, but this is a preferred method so that we can center it beautifully. So I guess that is pretty much it. And next we're going to build our actual story tile. So that's going to be quite similar and even easier than this. So let's build our story tile.dart, and I'm going to again use the stateless widget. So let's call it the story tile, and I'm going to import material.dart. So this time again we're going to return a padding. The padding is again going to be the same, so it's constant agent sets dot symmetric, horizontally 5 and vertically 10. Again, as a child, I'm going to provide a clip or rect because I want to give a border radius. So the border radius is like before, a circular border radius of 10. And as a child, I'm going to give it a size box. I'm going to pass a size box to give it a height. I could use a container, but when you only use a container to give something a height, so Flutter asks you to use a size box instead. It is more efficient. And as a child, I'm going to pass an image.network. And inside the image URL, I'm going to pass my image URL. And also I'm going to say fit is going to be boxfit.cover. Let's say boxfit.cover. Yeah, we also need to take our image URL. So let's go and define a parameter. And let's say require this dot image URL. So that is pretty much everything about the story tile. And now we have defined all the widgets that we need to define. Next, we need to build our screens. So the first screen that we're going to define is create a story screen. So I'm going to go inside my screens and define it. This time I'm going to be using a consumer stateful widget. Let's say create story screen. Let's also import Flutter Riverpod and also material dot to get rid of these errors. So let's start building our functionality. And if you go to the complete tab and if you open up create a story, the first time that you press create a story, the first thing that it does is it takes you to the image picker, and if you pick an image, it is going to then bring you to this screen that I'm not interested. So the first thing I'm going to do here is to define a future, and that's going to be of type file, and that's going to be called image future. So let's define our file. It comes from Dart.io. This future is going to be nullable, so we don't have an error. So inside the init state, the first thing that we need to do is to fill this future, and that's going to be image picker is equal to pick image, and this is the method that we have defined. Image future is equal to pick image, and this is the method that we have defined here inside my utils. So whenever your screen is created, the first thing that is done is we create image feature and then we call pick image. So the first time you enter the page, the first thing that happens is that image picker is opened. We also need to take care of loading, so let's say boolean is loading, and this is going to be initially false. So let's go inside our build method. Here you need a future builder. The future is going to be image future. Inside the builder, I'm going to let Dart to autocomplete. So I'm going to first of all take care of a snapshot. If snapshot.connection is set is equal to loading, I'm going to return a loader, and otherwise I'm going to return an error screen. Why error screen? Because this is the case that we have an error, and I'm going to return my image in case I have my image. So let's take another case, and that is if snapshot dot has data, and I want to check if my data is not null. So if my snapshot data is not null, I'm going to return my actual widget, and that is going to be scaffold. So the job that this scaffold does is just to put my image. So let's say that inside the scaffold we have a body, and inside that I'm going to put a stack. You later will know why. And inside the stack I have children. The first child that I have is a center, and that's going to be my image. So let's use image.file, and my image data is inside snapshot.data, but it doesn't seem to work because you have not even defined a child. After the snapshot, the next thing that we are going to do is to say we have a position, and this position job is to display a button on top of this image, and that button is going to be my post button. So let's say where's the base place. If you look at the complete tab, we have actually used a floating action button, but I think I'm going to go with another type of button in this project. So let's say it has, from the bottom this is 100, and from the left and right this is going to be 15, and inside the child I'm going to put a run button, and inside the label I'm going to say post 30. So this is just an experiment. Let's see how it actually looks. And we also need to take care of is loading. I'm going to go inside here and say if this is loading, show as a loader, or maybe just circular progress indicator, and otherwise show as our run button. So here inside the onPress, I'm going to make sure this is async, and because this button is used to post our story, the first thing I'm gonna do is to trigger is loading. Let's use the arrow syntax, and I'm gonna say is loading is gonna be to true. And then the next thing we need to do is to say ref.read story provider dot post story, and our image is gonna be snapshot the data. And I also want to use then clause. So when everything is done, I want to stop this set state. I'm gonna set it to false here, and I'm also gonna set it to false here. So I also want to handle the error case. So I'm gonna say on error, I again just want to put my set state and set it to false. So I guess this was all about this screen. I'm gonna put it to test. So let's run this app. So our app has actually been built, and now we can use our stories. But to be able to open up this screen, we first of all need to display our stories. So as you would see in the complete app, the stories are going to be here under your make post widget. So for that, we need to actually build our story view. And let's go build it. I'm going to go inside the screens, and I'm going to say stories view.dart. This is going to be a consumer widget. Let's choose stateless consumer. I'm going to name it stories view. We need to import both Riverpod and also material.dart. So the first thing we do inside the build method is to get all of our stories, and we can do it using our provider, and we can watch get all stories provider. Yep, that easy. And now we need to return story data.when. So you already know what I'm gonna do next. Let's first of all take care of loading and error cases. So the only difference we have this time is that we are using Sliver to box adapter because we're inside a Sliver list. So let's handle the data case. I'm gonna name my data stories. So for that, I'm gonna return a Sliver to box adapter because we're gonna have a list of stories, or I can just use the Sliver list view dot builder, not to need to change anything to Sliver to box adapter. But I'm gonna still need to wrap this one with a container. I'm gonna have a height of 200, and I need to pass a color, and that's gonna be app colors, that real white color. So because again we need to use a container, I'm gonna change it to a sliver. Let's start with item count, and this is gonna be stories.length plus 1, because the first item here is gonna be the add story widget. So we're gonna have one more item than the actual number of items, and then we need to go inside item builder, get our context and index. So here we set a condition, and the condition is if the index is gonna be equal to 0, you have to return add story tile. Otherwise, you're gonna return a story. So otherwise, I'm gonna first get my story, and this is equal to stories dot element add, and guess what the index is gonna be? It is gonna be the actual index minus 1, because I used my 0th index for add story tile. So this is gonna be the first index, and I'm gonna minus it by 1 to make it 0 again, and this is gonna be continued to the end. I'm gonna also add 1 to the end of the length, so it makes sure everything is perfect. And now let's actually return our story tile, but I'm gonna wrap it with an inkwell. So later when we tap it, we're gonna go and open up our story. And as a child, I'm gonna have a story tile, and inside here I'm gonna say story.image URL. So I guess this is it. This is all we had actually to do for stories view. Although later we're gonna change some small details. Now I'm interested to go inside my post screen. This is where I'm gonna display my story widget. So let's come here and say stories view. I'm gonna say put my story view, and yep, as simple as you see, I put my story view here, and if we wait for a little while, it has to appear here. Guess we have a problem, so let's check our debug console. It might very well be about indexing, and it sure is. Just click on this link to open up the index creating page. Make sure to sign in using the correct account, and then we are able to create our index. So we are navigated to the Firebase console, and I'm sure you're quite familiar by now how to create an index. Let's just click on save, and next we're going to be waiting for a while until this index is being built. So our index is finally built. Let's get back to the application. And here, as you see, we've got an overflow problem, and this seems to be about the sliver list. So it might very well be about using the sliver list. So instead of that, I'm going to use a ListView.builder. Let's hit save. And now you see that the UI is a bit messy. So what could be the problem? And the problem could very well be about ListView being vertical. So let's turn it horizontal. Let's say scroll direction is going to be axis dot horizontal. If I hit save now, you see that the problem is being fixed. And now if you click on this button, we have to go to the create a story page. So let's come here and say inside the sync build, I'm going to be using a navigator. So let's say navigator of context dot push name. I'm going to go to create story screen dot route name, and as you see, we still don't have a route name. So let me create one. I'm going to come to the set part of this app and say, and let's also fix this import. Beautiful. So the next step is going to the route, and here I'm gonna add my new screen, and this is gonna be create story screen dot route name. For now we don't have any parameters, so let's return create story screen. I also make a constant. So perfect. Let's now save this file, and if I now click here, I have to go to this picking image screen. Beautiful. So we are now inside the pick image screen, and now if I click on any of these images, I have an option to post it to story. So if I click here, it's going to turn into a circular progress indicator that is also being funny, and nothing else happened. So if I come back, I see that the story is being posted here. So there are quite some issues that I have to fix. First of all, these stories don't look like what they intended to look like. Second, I have to go to create a story screen, and in case I am done posting the story, I want to navigate and pop the screen. So this is done. I also want to take care of the circular progress indicator. It looked really creepy. So what can we do instead? I'm gonna also make it centered. Let's see if it fixes the problem. I'm gonna go and add one more story. Yes, it fixed a problem here. And it also fixed a problem of story being popped. But stories are still too wide, so I'm gonna fix that problem too, and there's no space between these two. So let's go to the post screen, and I'm gonna put a size box under this, but because everything is a sliver, so I'm gonna turn it into sliver. The height is gonna be 10. Let's put a comma. I'm gonna copy it here, paste it too. So now we put some difference here, and it looks too much for me, so I'm gonna convert it to 8. Now there is some space between top and bottom of the story. Looks a little bit better. So now I want to take care of this. The story is being too short. So let's go to stories view. The height is 200. And if we go inside story tile, the height is just 100. So what about if we make it 120? No difference. So I'm gonna leave it as it is, but I'm also gonna set a weight of about 80. It is two lists, so let's make it 100. And now my stories are starting to look more professional. Yep, I'm just gonna add a 20. So maybe we go with 110. So it looks quite good to me, but your preference can be different. So I'm gonna close the story tile. And it was pretty much it. This was everything about posting and receiving the story. So the next step is actually opening the story and all the fun facts. So our app is almost complete. The only feature that we have not yet implemented is a story detail screen. When we press on any story, we go to a detail screen in which it displays all the stories one after another. And it also has a timer. So let's start implementing that part. And just now I remember that I have forgotten to implement one method inside our repository. So let me go back to a story repository. And here we have a method for viewing a story. So let's say view story. This method is actually requires a story ID. So let's go and have it. I'm going to set this as async. And here we have a problem. It is because I have to define it as required, not final, of course. So let's go into the body. As always, we're going to implement try and catch. And if we have an error, we're just going to return error to string. Otherwise, I'm just going to return null. Inside here, let's go and say await. I'm going to go inside Firestore and collection. Let's go to stories. And I'm going to find the exact document with our story ID. And then I'm going to go and update that document. Inside that document, we have a property that's called views. And as you remember, views is the list of all the views that our story has got. So I'm going to go inside that property and update it. So let's say I'm going to go inside views and I'm going to say field value dot array union, and I say add to the list of views my UID. And let's make sure it is inside the list. So this is exactly all that we had to do. And now if we open up a story, we can call this view story method. So let's close it here. And I'm going to now create the last screen that we have, and that's going to be story view screen dot dot. So this is going to be an stateful widget. I'm going to call it story view screen. Here we need a parameter, and that is going to be stories. So let's say final list string stories. I'm going to also add it to the constructor. Beautiful. And now inside the widget part, the first thing I'm going to do is to create a controller. But for this specific project, we need to add a dependency. And that dependency is called story view. So let's go and add it. And I'm going to say add dependency. And let's add story view. Let's hit enter. And here it says that we already have it inside our dependencies. So beautiful. So let's create a controller based on that. And after creating our story controller, let's also create the list of stories. So I'm going to create a list called story items. And I'm going to initially set it to empty. Let's also make sure we import it story view. So let's try to import it here. And now let's go inside our init state. So the way that this package works is that before we display any stories, we have to create a list of our story items. So I'm going to go inside init state and do that. Because here from our constructor, we receive a list of a string. This list represents all the stories that we have. Sorry, this list should be of type story, not string. So beautiful. And our job inside here is to loop through all our stories and turn them into story items. So let's say for final story and widget.stories. So we use a for each loop to loop through it. And then we say for each of them we create a story view. And that is equal to a story. item. And if you take a closer look, this story item belongs to a story view, and we have not created here. So what we actually need to do is like this. We create a story view, and this story view is going to be displayed inside our story list. So the first part that we have to create is a view. So this view is a widget that we create ourselves. I'm going to call it story detail screen or story detail view, whatever you choose, and I'm going to pass a parameter. And then you have a duration. I'm going to say each story should last for 5 seconds. So this is it. We created our story view. And then I'm going to say story items dot add story view. So let's make sure also this is story item. This is of type story item and not string. So now we have done this part. Let's go inside of our body, and here I'm just going to return a story view. We have a story items and also controller. So this is pretty much it for the story view. Now we need to create our story detail screen. I'm going to pick it stateful consumer, and the reason is because every time we open up a story, we need to mark it as viewed. So that's why we need a stateful widget. So let's call it story detail screen. And now I'm gonna go and import Riverpod. This widget requires as a story parameter. Let's also add it to constructor. Inside the init state, I'm gonna call the view story method that we defined earlier. So let's go to story provider and call the view story method, and I'm gonna say widget.story.storyid. So like this, every time we open up the story detail screen, that the story is gonna be updated and the view count is gonna increase. And according to the method that we have defined, for each story, for each person that views this story, we only count it once. So if you view the story multiple times, it is only gonna be counted as one. And this is exactly the way that the real Facebook works. And now inside the build method, let's return a scaffold with a background color of white. Inside the body, I'm going to define a stack. Inside children, the first thing I'm going to have is a center. And inside the center, I have a size box. The weight is going to be infinite. And inside the child, I'm going to have an image.network. And let's pass our image URL inside that. For the feed, I'm going to say box feed.cover. I'm going to cover the entire page. Then we need to put our date posted. So let's come down below our center. Here I'm going to return a position. From the top, it's going to have a distance of 50. And from the left and right, I'm going to set it to 0. So let's say 0, 0. And inside the child, I'm going to post info tile. We have already used it with a post, like here. And I see we have some posts from our viewers who has cloned the repository and exactly posted everything inside mine. So this is our post info tile, and I'm going to implement it exactly like this inside here. So for the date published, we have created that, and for the user ID, I'm going to have author ID. Beautiful. And under this position, we're going to have yet another position. This one we put a space of 10 from the bottom and also 0 from left and right. Inside the child, we have a container with a width of 100 and a height of 50. The color is going to be black, and you're going to be using a light shade of black so that the background can be seen. Inside the child, we have a row with the main axis alignment of center. So as the children, I'm just going to put an icon, and this is going to be a font awesome icon. And inside the icon, this is going to be font awesome icon.ice. So let's also import for now some icons. The color is also going to be white, so let's again use app colors dot white color, or maybe real white color. And under that, I'm going to have a size box with a width of 10. And then I'm going to have the last widget that I have here, and that is going to be the number of my views. And let's have a style. I'm going to say text style. The only thing I do is to say the color of white. So let's say colors. And again, use app color and use a real white color dot white. Let's also make it constant, and with this, I guess we have done everything we needed. So let's fix some imports here. And also maybe add our key, but I don't want to do that right now. The next thing we need is to add our navigation. So if we click here, we're going to end up in this screen. So I'm going to go inside my story tile. Here we don't have any mechanism for that. So I'm going to go one page back, and that's going to be stories view. Here we return our story tile, and here we have an on tab. So when we click on this, we have to say story view screen dot route name, and again we need to define our route name. So let's go to this screen. Under our parameter, I'm gonna define my route name. So this is gonna be static constant route name is equal to story view, and let's go inside our routes. So here I'm gonna copy and paste, and this one we say story view screen dot route name, and here we also return story view screen. This cannot be constant because we need to add a parameter, and that is going to be a list of stories. So let's say final stories is equal so let's pass our parameters, and that is going to be stories. And now let's hot restart the app to make sure everything is running smoothly. So now that the app is hot restarted, let's click on one of these stories, but nothing happens. Let's go to story tile and stories view. Inside the ink field, we have defined the push mechanism. Let's see if we don't have an error, and I'm going to also open up the console. Going to debug console. Let's click on it once again. And the reason is stated that we pass no parameter, and that is correct because here we actually pass no arguments. So I'm going to pass my stories here, hit save. So let's now open up our stories. And I don't understand why we have a problem again. Let's clear the terminal. I'm going to pass it here, and it is going to say this is not a subtype of story. Maybe because this is an iterable. Let's turn it into a list. Hit save. And I'm going to click again. This time it is working. So this is our story feature. And every story is going to last for like 5 seconds. And then we're going to go to the next story. And when our story is done, it's going to close everything automatically. But we have not defined that mechanism yet. So we can actually go to our stories view. So we can go to story view screen. And here that we have returned our story view. I'm going to define some more mechanisms. And first of all, I'm going to set the indicator color to be black. And then I'm going to also say on complete, I'm going to use navigator.pop. So let's remove this parenthesis. The app is saved. And now if I come back and open up the story again, first of all, we can see our indicators, and if our time is complete, it should be closed automatically. So yes, beautiful. So this is all about this tutorial. In this video, we learned how to implement a story feature. We learned how to post stories. We also learned how to display stories. And also we learned how to update our view count. And as you see, because I have viewed this story, the view count is being changed. So this was all about today's tutorial. See you in the next one.